I'm shooting this video out of sequence from the ones that I'm presently filming on Storm of Steel, just to try and illustrate something about the combat mechanics in the Napoleonic Brigade series at the request of someone who's watching a past video of mine on oscillates from that series. So I was happy to try and satisfy his request. I hope I can do some justice to the response. Must bear in mind I'm no expert on this series, and it's been a long time since I played it, so I might forget a few things and leave out some things, but hopefully nothing essential. Otherwise, just treat this as a just treat this as a kind of broad brush perspective on the thing. Now, the first thing to say about this is that these sheets, the player aid sheets, are your friend, because they essentially give you everything that you need to follow in performing the various procedures in the game. And they are in order of the sequence of play. So you start with random events, and then various order things. Then there's a phasing fire phase. So you'll note that's something important to note at the top of page 2, the phasing fire phase. So that comes before movement. So let's say the player turn is the Russian player here. We have the French over here. And so it's the Russian player turn. They perform their various command phase procedures, and now before moving they are going to fire, and only units that fire now in the third version, version 3 of the rules, are the artillery and the skirmishers. Let's zoom in a bit there. Okay, so this is very important because previously there was fire combat for infantry, regular infantry units as well, but this has basically been rolled into two different things. The first thing is that it's rolled into close combat, and the second thing is that it's rolled into something that's called a zone of influence. So the zone of influence is essentially the 2 hexes to the front of one of your infantry units. So this brigade from Suchet's division is able to fire out into here, but there's no resolution for it. It's just considered influence it has upon that region. The scale of the game is such that most of any effect of volley firing and lines of men firing is going to happen as the enemy is coming into close. And so if, say, I had a Russian unit here, he's outside the zone of influence. If he goes into here, he's in the zone of influence, and if he's going over to here, if that were possible, he's moving out of the zone of influence. So he's going to have some influence from this unit, and that influence being interference by being shot at. Otherwise, if the Russian unit is here, it is only going to feel the effects of fire combat from this brigade when it attempts close combat with it. And we'll look at how that works in a bit. So the first thing to notice, or the first few things to notice, then, is that only the artillery and skirmishers fire in the fire phases. And if in your player turn, they fire before you move. Now, in the order of these sheets, page 2 is has the phasing fire phase and the movement table on it, and then page 3 actually details the fire phase. So that tells you something else, in that fire happens around movement. So the player whose turn it is fires first, then he moves, and then his opponent will get to fire with artillery and or skirmishers. So it's quite simple really. We'll do skirmish fire first and then artillery fire. Skirmish fire is taken, now it can only happen at adjacent hexes, so we would have to assume that these had already moved in a previous turn. So let's move everything up a bit like this. So let's say this is the situation we are facing at the start of the turn. It's the Russian player's turn. He's done his command and now he wants the skirmishers to fire. So what you do is you look at the skirmisher fire value. Interestingly enough, there is none such on these counters. So this is a feature of this being an older, these counters are from an older version of the game. But otherwise, so that's one thing to take into note. You'll find updates on the MMP website in the gamers section if necessary. On more updated ones, you see there's a fire value printed on the counter. And each skirmisher has a full and a reduced side, and the reduced side is going to be reduced fire value. Now, I can't remember exactly, but I think yeah, it says in the fire table here, it says that elite quality units, I think that maybe all skirmishers have a fire value of 2 full and 1 when reduced. That might be modified for certain nationalities, I can't remember. So for example, you might have half for a skirmisher, so you'd need 2. And so essentially what you do is you take the firing skirmisher's fire value, so we've got 2 there and 2 here, so that's going to give us 4. And then you subtract the fire value of the skirmisher in the target hex. So that, say his is 2, so that's 4 versus 2 gives us 2. And then you subtract modifiers for fortified village, Limbador in square, rifles firing, and then you reach a number, and so here say there's no other modifier, so we have a number of 2. By the way, skirmishers can fire in all directions, so say a skirmisher was here, he doesn't just have a zone of influence out the front. In fact, I don't think they have a zone of influence, but he can fire in all directions. So this one could fire here and this one here. They could combine 2, 2 against 2, gives a net of 2. And you roll your d6 and then you see if you hit. Be careful to check these sheets for things like disorganized, routed or out of command skirmishers can't fire. Now, what happens, you say, if you're firing at someone who's not a skirmisher? Well, then they have no reduction on your fire. So this 2 skirmisher unit firing at cavalry will have a net of 2. This 2 firing at 2 will have a net of 0. So there would be no effect. In effect, their fire at each other would cancel each other out. So, but let's say this one hits, he rolls a 1 or a 2, so it's a hit, and if it's a hit on cavalry, you check here. Sorry, I'm looking at this from a different direction from you. So cavalry, they have a morale 1 reduction, and if there's a commander, you have a commander loss check. If he had been firing at infantry, then it's a morale 1 reduction and 1 straggler loss. So that's not a check, but that is a straggler loss. And if they've been firing artillery, morale 1 and 1 gunpoint loss. If you have a gunpoint loss, so say if the skirmisher for argument's sake had been firing here, so you would lose a gunpoint and that 5 goes down to a 4. Now remember, normally you have to target units at the top of a stack, not counting leaders. So say here we have a stack with a skirmisher and an infantry brigade underneath. So first of all, there would be a reduction of their skirmisher. Say he's reduced. So now we have a 2 against a 1, and the skirmisher would take the loss. If the skirmisher was underneath, then the infantry brigade would take the hit. If we had cavalry in that stack and the infantry brigade was on top of the cavalry, the skirmishers can normally you would target the infantry brigade, but skirmishers can actually target artillery even if they're not at the top of the stack. So that's quite helpful if you want to move them close up and try and take out or bring down our enemy artillery. Another useful point of doing that is that if this artillery unit wants to fire out at the Russians, it is now blocked because there is a skirmisher adjacent to its zone of to its firing arc. Well, yes, I can't exactly remember, but I seem to remember that if a skirmisher is firing a skirmisher and they cause a hit, then you flip the skirmisher. But you can easily check that. So that's skirmisher fire. It's easy. You just add up the numbers, subtract any that you have to, and then roll the die and check what the hit causes. Generally just a morale loss. Well, for everyone a morale loss. Cavalry commander check, infantry straggler loss, artillery gunpoint loss. Note there's certain modifiers like if rifles are firing. I think that's only British rifles perhaps in the Talavera game that you have. And if the target is limited or in square +1, if they're in fortified terrain or town or village -2. So skirmishers are not going to be very useful firing at that. But as I showed you, you can combine your skirmishers fire together. So now we'll move on to artillery fire. So let's say these skirmishers are here and this artillery wants to fire at this infantry unit here. So first of all you check the range 1, 2, 3. So that's 3 hexes. Then you check the artillery unit. This one has 5 gun points. As we saw there, we had 5 gun points reduced down to 4 from skirmisher fire. So that can happen. Always check your artillery for the number of points they have left. So you go to the artillery fire table, gun points 5, range and hex is 3. That gives us a 2 or a 3. 3 is for heavy artillery. Is that one heavy? Well, again, the annotation's different in this version, but I believe the newer ones where you have an H or some such for heavy artillery. So use the bold number if it's heavy artillery, otherwise you use the lighter number. And again, you roll the die, and but you don't, and then you check it on a different column. So we've got a 5 value, say it's 2 with the light artillery. If I rolled a 1, we get 1 morale loss, and then -2. Yeah, sorry, I thought that wasn't correct. This is actually annotate. So where were we? We got 5 value of 2. So we rolled a 1. That's 1 loss, and then morale down 2. So here is 1 loss. Here morale down 1. Here nothing. Here morale down 1, and here nothing. And you can see the spread. So 2, 4, and 6 at the lower gun points aren't so great. But 50% of the time you're going to get 1 morale loss all the time. Note also, always note your annotations and the special points. For example, only 1 gun point can fire out of town village hexes. So you might think it's a good idea to stick your artillery on a town and have them firing out from there, but only 1 gun point will be able to do it. I'm not sure of the rules, but in that case you might want to, you can detach artillery. I know that. You get detached counters, and so you could put, say, 1 gun point facing that way, detach another counter, another gun point, this hex facing that way, etc. So you could break that down into 5 different batteries if you like. I'm not sure if you'll be able to put those batteries in the same hex facing different directions. You'll have to check that. But you can break the guns down into detachments. No problem. Again, always check the fine print. So the loss adjustments, unwrecked A and B morale units and C morale units stacked with a 1 rated or better commander reduce any morale change result by 1. So that means all these 1 morale, so morale -1, morale -1, all of these will be as nothing to A and B units that are unwrecked, or a C unit with a commander, a decent commander. So you're often going to see those commanders with the C units just to keep them held together under artillery fire. So you get morale -2 here already with 1 gun point. But note, so just to reiterate, gun points here, that's 1 gun point firing, range of 1. You're on the 1 column, range of 2, you're on the 1 column, range of 3, you're on the 1 column, range of 4, no effect unless they're heavy, it's a heavy single gun point, in which case you're also on the 1 column. So you see that's light gun, 2 gun points have no effect at range 5 and over, but a heavy would have 1 point. And that's about it for fire combat. Just some little points about ground batteries and so forth. Disorganized, routed, and naught strength units may not fire. So obviously you've got no gun points, they're not going to fire. If it's disorganized and routed, again, it cannot fire. So that is artillery fire. So now we go to the close combat. I'm not going to detail charge because you asked about fire combat, I believe. You could probably model your way through charge based on seeing how these things work. So it was the Russian turn. Their skirmishers fired, their artillery fires. Maybe they caused a 1 morale loss. So he's gone from good order to shaken. And then it's the non-phasing fire phase. So now the French player gets a chance to fire back. At the moment he's only got a skirmisher there. If his artillery was there, his artillery could fire out here. Don't forget your fire arcs. So artillery can only fire out in those front 2 hexes and the arc reaching out from them. So along this line and along that line. So close combat. So let's say in the Russian turn he had fired this. He fired the skirmishers to no effect, and then he moves. He moves up this fellow. Let's say he moves that skirmisher out there. I want him to target a single brigade. This one here and this one here. Now, you note here in the close combat sheet on page 5, it says in movement phase. Now, don't confuse that with resolving the close combat in the movement phase. You resolve close combat in the close combat phase, but the attacker enters the defender's hex in the movement phase, and it costs 2 movement points. So, for example, with this fellow here, that would cost 1, 2, a clear hex there, that's 3 movement points, plus 2 to enter that hex, that's 5 movement points. And I seem to remember that an infantry unit in line gets 8 movement points, but it costs 2 movement points in a clear hex. In column, it would be 8 movement points and 1. So this fellow would not be able to do that. He would have to be here. Then he would go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6 extra to enter that hex. If it was in reverse and it was the French unit was in column, which I believe is designated by placing them that way, then you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that would only cost 5 movement points. Okay, but at the moment we're looking at the Russian player turn, so let's just say he had actually started there, and he's able to move on to there in close combat. Now the first thing we should note, going back a moment into the movement phase, is that he moved within this fellow and this fellow's zone of influence, which I mentioned earlier. What does that mean? So this is where you get part of the fire power of these units rolled into the zone of influence. So here's the zone of influence outside the front. The zone of influence affects moving from one zone of influence to another zone of influence is -1 morale level. Changing formation is -1 morale level. Retreating and there's no rally. So effectively what that is going to mean for us here is he starts the turn here. Fire, did some fire. Okay, I'm going to move him back there. Okay, well, let's start the turn again. Command phase has happened. Fire phase, he gets shaken. He goes, okay, that's my movement. 1, 2. He's in a zone of influence, no problem. Now he wants to move out. 3, 4, 5, 6. So he's moving out of the zone of influence of both those fellows. So what that means is as he goes into close combat, he is going to lose a morale level and become shaken himself as he's going against that shaken fellow. Now I can't off the top of my head remember, and just having a quick look at the rules, I can't see if 2 zones of influence would give him 2 morale level drops. But that's something you'll have to check. That's obviously quite important in a situation like this. Now consider if this unit had been disorganized, that's 2 down from the normal state, he would not provide a zone of influence. So if this fellow wasn't there, you could move in and in without any morale drop into close combat. So his buddy's supporting him there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He still gets it from him. Okay. Also, something worth noting is cavalry doesn't have a zone of influence because obviously they don't have they aren't able to fire volleys of fire. Artillery don't have it, but they do have opportunity fire zones. So say I have fired as the Russian and now he's moving 1, 2. Now there's an opportunity fire zone of I think 3 hexes out in front of this artillery unit. If I try to leave an artillery unit's opportunity fire zone, I can fire. Now also if I enter into it, so if I was here and it goes 1, 2, 3, it stretches here. So he could fire at me here, say I'm okay, and I for some reason, okay, maybe he's in column, and he keeps charging along, and then somehow manages, he's entering the hex. I get another shot as the artillery as he leaves the fire zone, which begins here. So that's the kind of the artillery version of the infantry zone of influence. And cavalry have a similar thing as well, that they have an reaction charge zone. So it works very similarly in that if I'm moving into it, they get an opportunity to charge at me. Okay, but so I'm going to go back here. Let's assume these fellows are like this. He was shaken from here, and this one was already disorganized. So we go to close combat. So close combat is very interesting. There's a few phases. The first thing to do is check to stand. So essentially what it's simulating is that these guys are moving towards each other. They're firing at each other and you're attempting to close in. That might not be what actually happens. Does the enemy stand and take your charge or your close combat? Do your men stand, or as they get pushed closer to the enemy, do they break and run back? So you check to stand, and you have the checking order is important. So normally the attacker will check first. If everything's no, I beg your pardon, I take that back. Okay, so it completely depends on order of priorities. So if the defender's in a town or fortified village, or if you're attacking from, then the attacker will check first. And then if the defender's in a town, the attacker only checks. Otherwise you both check. Well, it depends. Okay, so let's take the situation. Say the defender is in a town. So the attacker's going to check to stand. So you have to roll equal or higher on one die. There's something missing from this table, which is the morale level of the unit. So I've got it on my annotated sheet here, so you can see morale level A, B, C, D or E. Now what we have to do then is to check our army rosters. So this unit here is Langeron's R32L. So we check for Langeron. Where is he? So he's here. R32L. So he is a C morale unit. And this is the amount of steps or hits, as it were, that he could take. If he goes below the tick mark, he's going to be shattered. So, and this is the size of the unit AB. So that's A is quite big, AB is bigger, AA is bigger again. It goes up like that. So he's AB, which is quite a large unit, but only has a morale class of C. You notice another comparable unit has same size, has a morale class of A, and he takes 3 hits before going down to AB size, whereas this one takes 2 hits before going down to A size, so he breaks, his cohesion breaks quicker. But anyway, so we've got morale of C. So looking at our table, rough piece of paper here, so you have to imagine A, B, C, D and E. So C, we have to roll a 3 or higher to stand. So if the attacker rolls a 3 or higher, then he stands, and we will go to determine the combat result. So if you're attacking into a town or village and the attacker wins the check to stand, you immediately go to the attacker 1 column and resolve it there. If they failed, then you would go to the defender 1 and check a table and check the result there. Otherwise, say if we're in the defender's just in fortified terrain, the attacker checks first. If he won, then you would check for the defender. If the attacker lost, then you would just count that as defender 1. You see here, if the first checker fails, the second checker automatically wins. They don't have to roll. But if the attacker won, then the defender rolls. If the defender also won, then you go to what is called a firefight. So if both win, you have a firefight. If only the attacker won, you go to the attacker 1 table. If the attacker lost, then you go to the defender 1 table. If in certain case if none of the above are equal, are the case, then the smallest will check first. So the smallest could be the defender, so you might get the defender checking first. Here also you have the defender checking first. So if the defender lost in that case, then the attacker would automatically win. So let's say that both sides won and we're going to have a firefight. So always check your dice roll modifiers. Again, check the small print. Dice roll modifiers plus minus 2 maximum. Here's the modifiers. So if you have a large unit or you are in column, and this all applies to is about the opponent's formation and size. So if my opponent is large or in column, I get a bonus. If I am skirmishers in a firefight, I get a minus 2. If it's night time, I get a minus 2. So say my opponent, sorry, it's been a while, and these tables always confuse me a bit in the way it's worded. So sorry, yeah. Now this is my size. That's take 2, 3, or whatever. So yeah, what we're doing is we're finding a result to me. So if I'm large or in column, there's a +1, so I'm going to take more damage in a firefight. And if my opponent is large, then I go, and he's in column, I check here. If he's so if he's A or B and in column here, if he's AB plus here and A to C, smaller size, I go here. If he's in line, he's going to deal more damage. This is the more damage column, so he only needs to be B plus or in size to use this column. So I roll the die, add or subtract the modifier, and then like with the artillery table, we check the losses. So nothing, one loss and a bracket is a straggler. 2 losses and morale down 1. 2 losses, a straggler and morale down 1. 2 losses, 2 stragglers, morale down 2. 2 losses and 3 stragglers lost. So you'll note that you don't always get a morale loss. Here, lots of men die, but your unit is basically still standing. Here, your unit's more falling apart. Morale goes down 2. You get 2 stragglers and quite a few men die as well. So it's interesting how those charts are spanned. So in this situation that we had here, say we had a firefight, then what would happen is that he would be moved back to where he was, and each side would roll for the respective losses. Say we roll 3 and there's no modifiers for him. Now the enemy is size, we have to check, Suchet, French fellow, is size, Suchet is 335. 335, he's a size A unit. B morale, size A unit. So, and he's not in column. So it's line, he's B plus. So I rolled a 3. I take 2 hits and 1 morale loss. So, I look on the Langeron sheet, R3 to L. I scrub out 2 of these. So now I'm down to an A size unit, and I'll take 2 morale hits, which is denoted, he's shaken, so another morale hit would be disorganized, and a third would be routed, so he's going to actually rout away. If he had been fresh and he hadn't taken a hit from zone of influence, maybe he was assaulting from the rear, 2 morale hit would just bring him down to disorganized. And again, like this fella, if he takes one morale hit, he's going to be routed from a disorganised state, as well as any of the losses and straggler losses that he would take. How do you do straggler losses? Well, let me just see. Say it was 2-2. So, where are we? So, that's 2 hits. And then the straggler losses are always after the main hits. So he's now counted as here, almost broke, shattered. If I took 2 more hits in a subsequent turn, I'd go 1, 2, and then I have to move down those stragglers there. If I'd taken 2 hits and 1 more straggler, I would go here, and the unit would be counted as shattered, and you'd have to look at what happens then. So, and it's the same, essentially, with the attacker one and the defender one. The slight difference being is that you have a different chart for the attack and the defender. For the firefight, you're both sides using the same chart because you're just standing there shooting at each other. Here, if the attacker won, then this is noting the attacker's losses. So again, there's something missing from the top of the chart, which you can see here. Perhaps you can in pencil, as A, B, C, D, and E, the morale of the unit. You can see it's they remembered to put it on here, but they've forgotten it on the attacker one. So, say Langeron's unit there. What was it? He was morale. Was he morale C? Say he won. It's not a firefight, so he's in the hex in close combat still. He won, and he's a C class unit. I roll the die, and I will check my losses here. So I might just get 2 straggler hits, or I might get 3 hits, 5 straggler hits, and 2 losses. So you can see, even though I won, it's been devastating to me. However, the defender's losses, let's just assume they're also a C morale class. They're going to get minimum 6 stragglers. They could get 10 straggler losses and 4 combat hits. Now, they don't get a morale loss. They don't get a morale loss as such because they always rout. So you don't need to drop them down morale level, they always rout, and they have to retreat 1 hex back. Another thing to note, again, always check the small print. The attacker never takes more permanent losses than the defender. So say the defender got a lucky roll and took 1 permanent loss, whereas the attacker on their roll was slated for 2 permanent losses. Well, then you would adjust that down to 1. The defender's not going to take more permanent losses. They might take more straggler hits though, and they could be significantly damaged in morale loss. So, and it's the same if the defender won. Here's the attacker losses again, and there's the defender losses. So you can see there's a lot more going on there because the attacker lost. Less here because the defender won. Look at the general note at the bottom. All conditions for modifiers are with regards to your own units, unless otherwise noted. So that was what I meant there. That's about your own unit, modifiers for. And always remember to check for commander losses when a unit suffers permanent stragglers and or permanent casualties and or stragglers. On 11 or 12 on 2 dice, they're going to take a commander loss, and the stat will lose another morale step. Also, in the fine print, note that on an unmodified roll of 1, A and B morale units, the unrated, and C morale units will run rated better commander, those ones we saw before, gain morale +2 instead of the table result. So it's unmodified. So you roll a 1, unmodified, blah blah blah. But you might have rolled a 1 modified by 2, which will give you morale -1. But in this case, you're going to get bloodlust instead and go up. Same for the other tables as well. And Bloodlust is marked with the reverse of the routed counter. And I can't remember exactly what it does, but it kind of gives you extra bonus as long as you're staying in adjacent to enemy units in possible close combat against them next time. So that's it. That's all I'm going to do for you for fire. So that was close combat, artillery fire and skirmisher fire, and the fire phases and close combat phase. I hope that has been illustrative. There's obviously a few more. I mean, that's basically it. I might have left out one or two touches, but that's how it works. Don't forget the zones of influence. Stragglers don't, skirmishers don't have a zone of influence, but they can fire in the fire phase. Artillery have a kind of zone of influence in that they have that opportunity fire zone, but they also fire in the fire phase. And infantry have a zone of influence which gives morale hits rather than major numbers of points hits. And then close combat is where most of the damage to your unit is going to take place. Permanent and or straggler as well as morale hits. I hope that helps. Let me know.